Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Marconi and I work for Originate. Today I'm going to talk about the anatomy of a modern play application. This is a recollection of the best practices and lessons we learned delivering multiple Scala and play projects. I'm going to go layer by layers from build and configuration all the way to unit tests. So let's get started with build and configuration. And the first step when you're going to start a new play application is to try to lock the Scala compiler to be safer. This morning, the first talk we had in this room was called Toward the Safe Scala. And if you missed that talk, I highly recommend that you watch it online. It was a really awesome talk, and he discussed in a lot more detail some of the things that I'm going to talk about here. So when you start a new play project, you want to enable some Scala C warnings and linked options that make your code more robust. The very bare minimal set of options that you should enable are deprecation feature unchecked. The most important one, fatal warning. So if there's a warning, you want the compilation to fail. You don't want to compile with warnings. So warnings actually become errors. And excellent. Excellent is new in Scala 2.11. To Scala 2.10, it used to be called warnings all or something like that. You may want to check the Scala C dash excellent help to see all the options. I'm not going to read that. It's just to show if you're going to read the slides later and you don't have access to the Scala C command, you can have an idea of what's like. So you see that it does check for a lot of corner cases and minor problems that may affect your code. Other than that bare minimal set, I also like to enable some more advanced options. No adapt args, warn dead code, warn unused import, warn value discard. And of those, the one that is most important in my opinion is no adapted args. Why? Because it may lead to code, if you don't use it, it may lead to code that it's totally unsafe. So let me give an example. Let's say that you're gonna have a list of 1, 2, 3 and you call to set, okay? Can anyone tell me what's the result of this expression? Surprisingly, it is a Boolean false, okay? And I'm going to leave it at an exercise to the reader to figure out why this is not a set, 1, 2, 3. But if you call Scala and you pass the no adapted args, this is not going to compile. It's going to throw an error, okay? And this is an indication that something is wrong. So if you want to convert a list to a set, you should not be using the parentheses at the end. You just call just to set, no parentheses after that. There are other options. They really do not make your code robust, but they are nice. Nevertheless, I like to use encode and put a target for a specific JVM. Some people like the X feature to enable the new features of the Scala compiler. The last two ones, they really are for the true paranoid in you. I don't use them. They're here just for the sake of completeness. Okay. The second thing I would like to recommend that you leverage static analysis tools because they really do help for you to keep a health project. The one that I like the best is called Word Remover. And this is the page. And it's a plugin for SBT. You just add this line to your plugins.sbt. Okay, and it's going to warn you for a lot of things that you really should not have in your code, like if the compiler infers a type of n expression to be any, nothing, product, serializable. It also warns about option get, some methods in the list that throw as exceptions if the list is empty, so you should not be using those methods. And things like no and return, throw, var. I'm going to talk a little bit more about throw in a few slides. Finally, you should enforce coding standards if you work in a team. Even if you do not work in a team, if you're working alone, it's nice to have a tool that will enforce coding standards for you so they are kept consistent. The best tool is Scala style. It was used by Martin Order's classes on Coursera. You're going to lose marks if you do not comply to the code standards. This is the site. It's also a plugin for SBT, and there is a huge list of options. It's highly customizable. I will not even try to show all the options they have here. Finally, there are some tools that do automated code review for you, continuous static analysis. I like to use a tool called CodeSC. This is the site. And this is an example of a report that they have. This is actually from a project of mine, and apparently, if you score really well, they're gonna give you congratulations on Twitter. SBT options. There are some options for SBT that you should enable in your projects. One that is very important is the improved incremental compilation that was introduced in SBT 0.13.2. You add this line to your build as SBT, and SBT is going to be smarter about when you change a Scala file, which file should be recompiled. And I've measured the improvements in many projects that we have, and they varied from 25% to 80%, faster when you recompile code after a change. And what's better, the bigger the project, the bigger the improvement. So the 80% wasn't the longest project to compile. But of course, your mileage may vary. Those are not hard numbers that you may have different numbers for your project. Right now in SBT 0.13.7, they introduced an improved dependency management. So what this is going to do, you add a line to SBT, and SBT is going to cache some of the calculations it does when it has to resolve the dependencies. And this does speed up things a little bit. I don't have any numbers to show you here, but it also helps to reduce build time. There is this plugin for SBT that I really love. It's called Sp3 Updates, and I don't know why this is not in SBT by default, but hopefully there's a plugin for us. It adds a dependency updates task to SBT. And what this is going to do, it's going to check Maven for all the dependencies that you have in your project if there are newer versions. And it gives you a report showing all the newer versions that you can update in your dependencies. And this is the site. Again, it's just an SBT plugin that you can add with a single line. So let's talk about Typesafe Config. So Play uses Typesafe Config for all its configuration. And Typesafe Config is really, really awesome library. They have this format that's better than JSON, it's better than Java properties, and has more features than both combined. There's a website. Unfortunately, Play does not highlight well enough all the power that Typesafe Config gives to you, so they have a page with lots of documentation. I recommend that you check the Typesafe Config page to see all the features they have. And one thing that I like to do in my projects is to have a Typesafe config object. Okay, and the idea is that you're going to fail early, fail fast, and fail often. You don't want to have an error when an application in production because there is a problem with your configuration files. So probably in your projects you have somewhere a line of code like this one, you're reading some key from the play configuration file. And what's the problem? Not only this is a little verbose to have everywhere in your code, it's also not type safe. Did you spot the typo there? Okay, it's not written password. And if you have this in your application is going to fail at runtime. So what do? You can create a class settings, and what this class is going to do is when the application is started, it will read all the keys that are required, and then you can nest no objects with vols. So in that way, you have first, if there's some key missing, some key that is required, it will throw an exception. Your application is not going to start, so you're going to know beforehand that you have a problem that you need to fix. And also, as an added benefit of using this structure is that now you have a type-safe way to access all your configuration keys. So instead of writing something like this, you can just call settings db password, and now the compiler is going to check that this is valid. You can use auto-completion in your IDE. Makes things much simpler and easier to use. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Typesafe Config in other slides. I really like to use it for a lot of things other than just configuration, okay? So I have this class that I put in my projects to wrap the Typesafe config, just utility methods, and then I can read files other than application.conf. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, talk more of some creative use for Typesafe config files. Model. So model, when we talk about model, we have this long last battle, you know, where do you put your business logic? Should you put it in the model, in the controller, in a service? And then we have this debate, you know, thin or fat model. I really like what Martin Fowler said about it. So first, he defines a domain model as an object of the domain that incorporates both behavior and data. So there's an article that he wrote called Anemic Domain Model, and he says that there is an anemic model. It's a model that there is hardly any behavior on the object. They have little more than just a bag of getters and setters. You know, for me, they are like Pascal records or C structs glorified by getters and setters. They are not true objects. They are records. And the problem with this anti-parent is that it's contrary to the idea of object-oriented design, which is to combine data and process together. You know, if you have an anemic domain model, what you have really is procedural code. Okay? You're using classes as namespace for methods. That's it. But on the other hand, you know, we should remember that fat models usually are going to lead to so-called God objects, you know, the objects that know all, see all, have all. And those objects, they violate the solid principles, you know, especially the single responsibility principle is violated. They are difficult to reason about, they are difficult to debug, they are difficult to unit test, they are difficult to mock. So is there something that we can do, you know, to combine the best of both worlds? And it happens that, yes, in Scala actually you can eat your cake and have your cake too. This is how I like to do. So a fat model, we have a model and we have all the methods inside the model. The good thing is that the method is simple. When you call the method, it's simple syntax, user authenticate credentials. So we are talking here about objects and methods, but actually the sense of object orientation is that we have receivers and messages. Okay, this is how Smalltalk defined object orientation. So here, it's clear that I'm sending a message authenticate to my user receiver. Okay, it's very clear. If we separate the logic to a service, we're going to have an anemic model. It's just data, has no logic. And the service get a little bit more complicated now because I have to pass two objects to the method, and accessing the properties on those methods is a little bit more verbose. And when I need to call, I lose totally the idea of messaging receiver. I'm not sending a message to a receiver. User service is receiver of nothing. It's just a bunch of methods. So it gets a little more verbose, it's less elegant. So what do? You put everything on a trait, and this trait has a self type, so it can only be mixed into your model, and then your model is going to extend that trait. And now you can see that the syntax for the method, it's the same as it was before with the fat model. When I call when I want to send this message to the receiver, it's exactly the same as the fat model, same syntax. Nothing changed, but now I can break down, I do not need to have a huge object, I can break down all the responsibilities into separate traits. I do not need to limit myself to a single trait. So I will not create a God trait. I'm not replacing a God model with a God service with a God trait. No, I can have many smaller traits that are easy to reason about. And also they're easy to mock. I can override, when I instantiate an object, I can mock one of the traits that I'm extending, that I'm mixing into this object. The other thing that I like to recommend is that you avoid primitive types, and primitives, I'm using quotes here because I don't want you to confuse with the primitives that we have in the JVM. When I talk about primitive types here, I'm talking, of course, about ints and booleans, but also about things like strings and data that are actual objects in the JVM. You know, sometimes those are called tiny types. There's an article by Dick Wall called Type Early, Type Often, that I recommend that you read. It's on the Typesafe blog. And what Dick says is that you should not have a case class person, first string, last string, 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 and no, you should define types. You know, so you have a type first name, you have a type last name, you have a type address. So now you cannot mix those things. You cannot pass the last name as the first name or vice versa. And what are those tiny types? They are very simple case class. First name and name string. One thing that Dick doesn't mention on the blog, but you should try to do, is to use value classes whenever possible. They do bring some benefits, especially in terms of object allocation and runtime. This is not on Dick Wall blog, so keep that in mind. Okay. Require. So who here use requires in Scala in general? No one? Never saw require before? Okay, 3 people, 4. So require, it's designed by contract. So you put your preconditions in your model. So this model cannot be instantiated if the preconditions are not met. So for this instance here, this person class, I cannot instantiate a person class with an empty name. I cannot instantiate a person class with a negative age. So the preconditions are specified in your model, and this way you cannot have instantiate a model with invalid data. And it's really nice when you combine the types with the required. Then you can have things like, for instance, an email validator. So I have a case class email that all it does is to wrap a string, and I put a require there. So now not only my emails are type safe, they also are guaranteed to be valid. Okay, it's a huge improvement over using bare strings for your emails. Persistence. I have 3 tips to give to you regarding persistence. The first one is avoid a norm. Okay. The second one, very important, avoid a norm. And finally, you know, serious, avoid a norm. So why I don't like a norm, why I think you should not use a norm. So this comes straight from the play documentation. Using JDBC is a pain. Using the JDBC API is tedious. You know, we provide a simpler API for JDBC. And the first time I read that, I remember Linus Torvalds talking about subversion, and he said that subversion is the most pointless project ever, because subversion goal was to be CVS done right, and there's no way to do CVS right. So to which I say there's no way to do JDBC right. Okay? A norm is a simpler way to pain and tedium. That's it. You know, this is how they define themselves. So just to give an example, the Play computer database sample app, this is the showcase application for a norm. It's what Play shows you. This is how you should use a norm, the showcase application. If you wanted to add a single field to a domain model, you have to update the code in 11 places to add a single field to a case class. And this number 11 should be really important for them, because in the documentation they spent 11 paragraphs to explain to you why type safety is not important. And come on guys, really, this display, this is a Scala, are you going to try to convince me that type safety is not important? You know, Play is so proud of having type-safe templates, type-safe roots, and now they say, oh, for persistence, no, your data is not important. You do not need type safety for your data. I really don't understand. And what it boils down to, you know, what they try to convince you is that the Scala compiler cannot type safe your database. So since you cannot guarantee 100% type safety, your best options is to have no type safety at all. And for me, ANORM is the worst case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Okay, it's not type safe, it's not dry, you do repeat yourself a lot, it's too verbose, and it's full of boilerplate. So honestly, avoid ANORM for persistence. Okay, now you ask me, what should I use then? And that's a pretty good question. I don't have any solution for persistence that I like enough to recommend. I'm not saying that everything is bad. It's not that there are some good solutions, just that none of them really seem to me to fit well, to be really the one and true solution. My best bet would be Slick. The thing that I don't like about Slick too much is that it's also too verbose, even though it's type safe, and even though it does give you some query composition, things that you do not have with ANORM. So it's an improvement of ANORM, no discussion there, but it's still not the perfect solution. It seems like the newer version of Slick, Slick 3, it's going to bring some improvements to reduce the verbosity when you have to define your models and your tables. So we may have a good solution soon. A quick tip here, when you implement your model, create your API using features. So instead of having a get ID that returns a user, have your method get ID return a feature user. Even if you're using a database that you don't have yet a reactive driver for. You know, most databases we don't have reactive drivers yet. But this is good to prepare yourself, to prepare all your application to handle non-blocking I/O when those drivers do become available. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, you just wrap your blocking calls with Scala concurrent blocking or future successful, but try to define from the start your APIs to use features. This is going to help you a lot in the future. Okay. The other thing that I like to recommend, do not have inline code in your inline SQL code in your Scala code. This is another thing that I hate about ANORM. They seem to promote that, you know, write your SQL inside your Scala code, and just really avoid it. We should try to externalize all the things, you know. We should, why? Because then we're going to have shorter methods, we're going to have shorter classes, so try to keep your code minimal. It's going to take less screen space, it's going to be easier for you to scan, you're not going to have to scroll, you can read the code easier, you get rid of the noise, the noise in your code. The other advantage is that if you change your queries and your queries are externalized, then you do not have to recompile everything. I mean, if this is not reason enough, I don't know what could be. You can send your query files to a DBA and he can improve them, you know, work on them. And if you have a need to have different database, then you can have different sets of queries, you have different files. So try to externalize your SQL. Do not put SQL inside your Scala code. So how do we do that? Where do we put our SQL? And of course the answer is Typesafe Config. Okay? As I said, some creative ways to use the Typesafe Config. Remember, I just showed you my resource class that wraps the Typesafe Config. So now I'm going to define a query class that uses Typesafe Config as a resource to read keys from the file. And now I have a user query, and I can ask for specific queries on this file. So what does that file look like? This is what it looks like. It's a Typesafe config file. You're going to have your queries there. I'm using triple quotes here to remind you that your query can take multiple lines, so you do not have to put everything in a single line. You can format everything nicely and beautifully. One thing that I like is that you can, it's not full query composition, but you do have some flexibility to do some interpolation. So you look, I have a select query, and then I reuse that query to define a find by ID. I just add the where clause to the query I already have. It's not full query composition, but it's something, it helps. And if you want, you can also have a common file where you put snips of code that you can share across all your queries. So for instance, this is one to do case-insensitive Unicode searches on MySQL database. Talking about MySQL, this has nothing to do with player Scala, but it's something that I think it's worth mentioning. If you're using MySQL, make sure that you're using UTF-8 and before as the char set for your database, otherwise you're going to have some bad surprise soon. View. Let's talk about templates, okay? And my recommendation here for you, it's in your project, for you to consider other templates options. It's not that Thrill is bad, it's not, you know, it's actually pretty cool. It has some very unique features, like type safety. I don't know of any other template engine that is going to give you type safety. But it does come with some shortcomings, like you have full access to the full Scala power in your templates, and this will lead to logic in the templates that we know it's not a good thing. And also it takes time to compile. You know, your project may slow down because the templates do take a little while to compile. And the syntax, sometimes it doesn't work the way you think it should. The mailing list, every now and then someone pops up on the mailing list complaining about a Twirl template that looks like should be working, but it doesn't. So the alternatives, you can use Scalate, the Scala template engine. It offers you a lot of different syntax options that you can use, and it's becoming more and more common to use client-side rendering. So if you do use Twirl, go for it. It's a good thing. Just be aware of the problems that you may face. There's a lot of power that you can extract from the template engine. And my favorite feature after type safety is custom tags. Because they are very easy to define and they are very, very powerful. So this is an example of a template that I took from the Scala documentation, straightforward from there. And yeah, what I don't like, it's very verbose here, and a lot of repetition, and for sure you have a lot of this in your code, in your templates. So let's try to improve this with custom tags. So I have a trait asset that basically will just call controller root asset, and there's some convention of a configuration there. I'm going to assume that your CSS files are going to be in a folder CSS, and they're going to have a CSS extension. So now I create a custom tag for CSS, a custom tag for JS, a custom tag for image. Is not in the slide, but you can pretty much figure out what it would look like. And now, you know, on my template, instead of writing something like this, I just put add CSS bootstrap, JS jQuery, you know, image logo.png. And it's going to generate the same output as the lines above, but it's a much simpler syntax. So go crazy with your custom tags because they are very powerful. They do simplify a lot your templates. They give you a lot of power. So what's better than custom tags? advanced custom tags. And this is something that you're not going to find in the play documentation, and actually I don't think you're going to find this anywhere online. Okay, so finally, after over 30 minutes of me talking here, you're going to learn something new, something useful. So you have in your template something like if user is authenticated, welcome, else, nothing to see here. We see that a lot in the play templates, you know, using if, else for things like that. And the problem again is that very easy for you to litter your templates with business logic. You know, you may start with user is authorized, then you put, oh, let's put an end condition here, user is a premium subscriber, and things start to grow where they shouldn't. So how do we define a tag for that? So I have this here, it's a little hack. It's a class if tag, it takes a condition and a piece of HTML content. And you can see that I'm extending Scala XML node sequence. And the reason for that is to avoid HTML being double-escaped. Okay, it's a hack. You know, this is not supported by Play, but it's very useful. And I found this loophole that I could exploit. So you can ignore this first method, the sec. This is just because I'm extending node sequence. What's important here is this def to string. So it's pretty simple. If condition content to string, else I'm going to send an empty string. And look at this or else method that I have defined now. Okay, so we're going to see it in action pretty soon. But this is not the tag. This is a meta tag. Okay, this is something for you to create your tags. So this is the actual tag. Is authorized. Is authorized is going to take two parameters, a user and an HTML body. And it's going to create a new tag with the condition. So you see that now the business logic is encapsulated inside this tag. I'm just giving the tag a user object. The tag is responsible for figuring out how the user should be authenticated. And of course, I forward the body. And on my template now, instead of having an if-else, I have this tag is authorized user. So all the logic to define what's authorized is inside the tag. And I may call or else. You know, if I want to display something if the condition fails. And this is the piece that you're not going to find in the play documentation, how to do something if your condition failed, this or else part. And the or else is optional, you can leave it out. This tag is still going to work. And it's pretty cool. Now, you may see that there's no space between the else and the brace. And the reason for that is if you put a space there, it does not compile. This is one case, like I said, where the syntax doesn't quite work the way you think it should. So you cannot have any space between the else and the brace in this piece of code, just because the way the template parser works. Asset pipeline, Play 2.3 has SB2 web. I work with projects that use Grant and Human and GUP. So really, I don't have a strong opinion here. If you're working, if you have people in your team that are strong on front-end side, that they're strong JavaScript developers, they may not like SB2 web, which is not a problem. I've worked with projects using Grant and GUP, and they work very nicely with Play. If you're using Grant, there's this plugin that you can use that you can type Grant comments inside the SBT console. It's very helpful. Internationalization. So internationalization, again, is something that it's easier to do if you do it from the start. Okay, and it can be useful. It is useful even if you do not have plans to actually localize your application. If you're going to serve just one country with just one language, it still can be useful because, again, externalize all the things. You know, the same reasons I gave for externalizing your SQL statement, they apply here. You keep your code minimal. You can change the messages without having to recompile your classes. You can give it to third parties. So I work on a project that The CEO loved to tinker with the website copy, and I gave her the message files, and she was mesmerized that she could edit everything. And I never saw someone so happy with so little, because I gave her a way to edit the website copy. Okay, and you can also use that to solve minor regional differences. So I'm going to show an example right now. Okay. Again, so how do you store your localization message? You use Typesafe Config the same way I use it to store my SQL queries. I can use Typesafe Config for that. And to render your message, I like to use a project called ICU4J. It's a project that was developed by IBM, and it's used by a lot of companies. Okay, and it's a lot better than what you have with message format from Java. It supports named arguments, so in your message, instead of having brace 0, brace 1, you can have brace first name, brace last name. It's a lot more meaningful. It has better support for genders and plurals, you know. In English, plurals are very simple. You have one and many. That's it. But there are languages that have one, two, a few, many. They're different words, you know, if you have one, two, a few, or many. And some languages are really crazy. I think it's Polish. I'm not even going to try to describe how complex the rules for plurals are in Polish. So this is something that's handled by this library. It also supports cardinal numbers like 1, 2, 5,000, you know, the words written. Supports ordinals, first, second, third. Has full support for Unicode and much more. I really recommend that you check this library for internationalization. And it is the best of all. It's a drop-in replacement for message format. You do not need to change anything. You just change your import, and it works as always had. This is the site. This is the dependency for you to add to your build SB3. Okay, so I talk about minor regional difference, and now that I told you that I like to use Typesafe Config for my message files, I wanted to go back here. So what do I mean by that? I work on a project. We had a website. The website was just English, no other language, but they wanted to have it in the US and Canada. And they would just serve English in Canada. They didn't want to have French in Canada, just the English-speaking population in Canada. And even things like spelling difference, they said, we don't care about spelling difference between the US and Canada. We're going to use the US spelling everywhere. But even then, you have regional difference. Like here you have states, there we have province, you know. Here you have a zip code, there we have a postal code. And they did not want to have on a form state/province. They didn't want to have zip/postal code. So they want to, if you are coming from the US, we're going to just show you state. If you're coming from Canada, we want to show you province. And the developer who was doing this project before me, he littered the code with conditionals, with if statements to handle that. What I did, I created a message file using Typesafe Config, and then I created a separate file for Canada. And I was including the one for the US in this file, so I didn't have to duplicate everything. And I just put the difference there. And problem solved. It was very easy, just a few lines, and it worked beautifully. I could get rid of all the if statements in the code to handle those simple cases. I'm a little short on time. I'm going to skip this. I think. Okay, yeah, let's talk about this. Exceptions. I put this in the servers, but actually I could have put it anywhere because they apply to all your Scala code. Do not throw exceptions in your code. Okay? Exceptions are not functional. That's the reason. A function that throws exception is not a total function, you know. It does not return a value for all possible inputs, so this is a violation of functional programming. Instead, you should use try. Try does for exception the same thing that option does for no. And I don't think anyone here is going to disagree that option is a good thing. You know, who here is using no in the code? One guy. Okay, so it's the same reason, you know, the same reason that everyone here adopt option instead of no. You should adopt try instead of exception. The try is a value, you can return a try, and you can compose then using for comprehensions. It's the same logic behind an option. It's to make your code safer. Okay. It's 5:35, right? That this ends. Yeah, so, yeah, let me skip this. Okay, alternatives. I want to leave some time for questions. This is my last piece of advice for you. It's not a criticism, but play may not be always the best option for all the projects. Okay, it's not one size fits all. We have worked on some projects using Spray, and the newer version of Spray 2, is going to be integrated with Aka. It's going to be renamed now to be Aka HTTP, so they are putting the two projects together. We had amazing results using Spray in some projects. We have a project using Scalatra. People are very happy with Scalatra. Again, the Spray and Scalatra are also not perfect for every project, so it's a matter of considering which one you should use for your project. You know, there are alternatives out there. Play may not always be the best option. So, reference here, I'm going to put the slides online. Many things that I talk about here, we have blog posts on our site that you can read more about in more detail. And so thank you, everyone. And now feel free to ask questions. And I also would like to ask you, if you have experience with your Play projects, things that worked well for you, things that did not work well for you, feel free to share. I would love to hear from you too, what worked and what did not work in your Play projects. Yes?
So in one of the slides you mentioned so making your service as a batch service is less elegant, and then you suggested a different approach. Do you think any other, apart from that, any other reasons? Because you are moving all the behaviors out of the model class into the tried and mixing in the tried with the model class. So I don't see a big benefit over that, I mean, except the elegant part.
Yeah, so the benefit is that now you can break in many traits, so they, well, I think the reason is people just, they try they tend to fall into this trap, you know, oh, let's put everything in the service, and it gets abused. So it's more a matter of abusing this. I'm not against service. I had some slides about service that I had to skip. What I like to think is, if you have just one object, just one class, it should not be a service. It should be part of the model. If you have something that, an interaction that has more than one class, you know, so you have client and an order. So now you have two entities. So this, where does it belong? To the client, to the order, or maybe it belongs to a service. That's the situation where I would use a service. But if I have something that it's just interact with model, using the service it's not a good object-oriented design. You're not sending a message to a receiver. You're using a service as a namespace for methods. And you're using your case class just as a record. Okay? And this is not really true object orientation. This is procedural design. So it's more a matter of design best practices, and it does simplify, you know. And when here, of course, it had to be simple for the slides, for the time. But when you start to get things into dependency injection, you know, then the snowball starts to grow and grow. And I work on a project that it was using the cake pattern. It's something that also I did not have time to talk about, so I'm going to say it now. Avoid the cake pattern, you know. It's the bakery of doom. Don't use cake pattern. And so we open some classes, and there's like a wall of servers being injected using the cake pattern. It's a mess. And most of the time you do not need to inject those servers. You know? Now you can just pass, instead of passing your object plus the servers, you can just pass the object. It's just one thing that you have to inject, just one thing that you have to mock. You do not need to mock the object plus the servers servers, and you know the chain starts to grow and they snowball. Things starts to snowball. It's more a matter of design.